Hey, it's John Strohmeyer. We're back with the stream. This week, we are bringing on a special guest, Mike Whelan. Mike Whelan, hello.
Can
Mike,
you hear me now? We got
now.
to do that thing that happens on every live thing where you're like, let me go play myself on Facebook Live while we've got I
mean, can I see you? Can I see you?
We're all here.
I think we're all here. Close enough. To our live streamer, watcher fans, thank you for joining us this week. Mike and I are going to be talking about expert status. Mike, you wrote the book, Lawyer Forward, Finding Your Place in the Future of Law. Go buy that now. It's fun. Buy a couple copies. What we're doing today, we're going to talk about what I think is the point of your book. There are two choices for lawyers going forward. The harder, but ultimately more valuable path for lawyers is to develop expert status, expertise. Gives you a higher price point, higher return on investment for what you're doing. The other is being an audience builder, where you're not so concerned with you having the status as an expert, but you have access to the experts. You can bring together the team. And it's not necessarily an either or, but you're going to be primarily one or the other. I have stepped all over your brilliance. Correct me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, my background pre-law was in logistics, and so I tend to think of this as like more connected chains in order to serve people. It sounds inefficient and terrible, and yet we have a thriving economy built on the idea that you can buy a doll that came from friggin' China for $10. And Jess Birkin is on here saying, but aren't we already experts? You're a monster, Jess Birkin. But yeah, no, I mean, the argument that I'm sort of making in it is think about collaboration in that way that's more connected. Just for a second, step yourself back and think, I may not have to be everything by myself. And then B, when you do that, when you define the different roles, the two most profitable roles, which is true in supply chains in general, are the irreplaceable people. And one of those irreplaceable people is the point of sale, right? The person with the relationships. And the other is the expert, the person that does something no one else can do, right? So they just do something really rare. In both cases, you create a price premium on irreplaceability, right? Economists talk about the availability of substitutes. When there is an available substitute and it's easy to get to and it's good enough and people can just switch, it just lowers the value. And so those two roles are not the only two roles in the future of law. They just happen to be the most profitable. And so I encourage lawyers to pick one and really discourage them to try to do both at the same time, which is, your business might be able to address both in a networked way, but not you personally. It's really hard to be both.
Right. And that was one of the things I struggled with. And I had to talk to you a few times before it really kind of snapped too, of you're going to be a mix of both, but you personally, not your law firm, you're going to have to pick one or the other. And that's ultimately what we're going to have to figure out for ourselves.
Yeah, I just remembering every legal conference I've ever gone to, but one specifically stands out well, I'll give a couple examples. One, I went to a legal conference where in one session, there were a couple of really smart people up at the top trying to teach people how to use Twitter and LinkedIn for lawyers. And if you want to, and everybody's got their phones out there, and literally the thing stops because in the middle of it, this very old lawyer, this old guy says, wait a second, I'm on the site. Do I push the bird here? And I kid you not, for like 15 minutes, they're talking this guy through signing up for Twitter. And I'm like, bro, you're probably like 70. You don't need to figure out Twitter right now. You don't have to be everywhere all the time. And of course, in the very next session, the ethics people stood up and were like, you should never be on Twitter. Twitter is a disaster for you. And so, just that sort of confusion in the messages that we get from those conferences. And then another one I was at more recently where it was proposed that we should be available by text. Like all the time. We should always be available by text because that's what our clients want. And because our clients said so, we should be there. And then in the very next session, they're talking about, well, you should be people are hiring you because you know things that they can't possibly know because you're spending the time getting to know those things. Well, those two things can't both be true. You can't be textable by your clients at all times and still be expected to be in the basement reading books the way John Strohmeyer does. Speaking of, I think he's in a basement right now. Jess, you have to tell me, can you hear me now? Because I think Strohmeyer dropped, which means now it's story time with Mike. You guys are now in a situation where you have to listen to just me. So anyway, I think for me, the message, Jess says clients texting you, thumbs down. Absolutely right. So let me talk about the book real quick while John gets his technology figured out, because he's in a basement somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the book. The book starts out with me in a courtroom with a lawyer who was very senior to me. And he was really struggling. He was having a hard time with his practice. He was clearly forgetting who his clients were. He was doing all kinds of different practice areas. It was a rural practice. And so he was going to 5 different counties and just running back and forth and trying to cover all these different areas. And as a rural lawyer myself, like that resonated. And I had been told by plenty of people that was my only choice. That was all I could do. If you're a rural lawyer, you are signing off on being a general practitioner. You're signing off on running all the time. You're signing off on being available by text all the time because you're living in areas that don't have services. So you're like the point of contact for everything for these people's lives to kind of deal with conflict in these people's lives. And I'm running around and he's running around. And I remember going home to my wife and just saying, I can't do this. I don't want to live like that. And the book sort of sets off in a journey where I'm going through different models and thinking through, okay, here's how we're taught to practice. And I talk about the history of it and why we are taught this way. And then let me go through some business basics about how entrepreneurialism works, and especially how entrepreneurialism works today, how it works in the modern economy. And through that, I sort of land on this expertise versus solopreneurship conversation and the discipline that's different for each of them. That entrepreneurship is really built on accessibility. And we need lawyers. We do need lawyers in the legal supply chain who are figuring out how to be accessible, how to get the law to the people, right? It's pretty useless if people are sitting in basements and coming up with these really brilliant ideas, but it's not getting to people. That's not very helpful. And then on the flip side, we can't just be order takers. We're not dry cleaners. In fact, we are selling expertise. We are selling insights. And so that conflict of wanting us to be both accessible and expert, that conflict plays out in lawyers' lives. And for me, I don't talk about this in the book, but what really hit home for me while writing this book was the man that I mentioned at the beginning of the book. While I was writing this book, he committed suicide. It was right after Hurricane Harvey, and he just lost everything because he had no margin. He didn't have financial margin. He had no emotional margin. He just was running. He was so used to what I call the churn. The capital C churn is the bad guy of the book. He was so used to that he just couldn't do it. And he gave up. And I don't want to trivialize his suicide. I'm sure there was a lot of stuff going on that goes well beyond a business model, but it's reflective to me that the people bearing the burden of that conflict most of the time is us, right? We're told to be both of these roles. We're supposed to know how to do both of these things at the same time, but accessibility and expertise are not compatible. You literally cannot do both deep reading and text availability all the time at the same time. So that's sort of the core of the book. And I think I'm going to see if John texted me. Okay, well, John, Bobby, if you are with me, I'm just going to keep going because what can you do about it? You disappeared. So I got my caffeine and I'm going to go. I know what John wanted to talk about today.